Hello again, and welcome back to another video build. This time around, I'm finally making something for the long anticipated video game Cyberpunk 2077. And I really hope you enjoy it. Okay, so if you have seen one or two of my videos lately, you'll quickly see that I've been doing a lot of big projects with a ton of details to them. So for this build, I wanted to do something smaller, and the idea was to take a different approach to things. Try out some new techniques and mediums and just have fun with it. For starters, I know you get the best results of a 3D print like this if you separate the parts into smaller pieces. It's simply easier to print sand, paint, and a whole range of other things. But what if I merged all the parts together on the computer before I printed it? Will you get it to look as good? Can you save any time on it? Well, let's see how it goes. Well, clearly, the top part would need a small miracle to get in shape again. But I was kind of expecting this. Because even at 0.12mm layer height, slower speeds, and a tight C gap, you can kinda always tell where the supports have been, because it really doesn't look good. But here's the thing I want to try out. I wanted to fill most of the deep cracks by using some super glue. Yeah, that's right, the duct tape of 3D printing. I put it on rather generously, and by not using any kind of accelerant to it, it was given just enough time to level out a bit, which was really nice. At this point, I like to give the prop the first layer of filler primer. I could have started to sand it right away, but I really like how the primer dulls everything down, and it gets a lot easier to see what you got to work with. And boy does this piece need a lot of work. I do realize you can use XTC90 from Smooth-On, or something similar, to do what I just did, but that stuff is just so expensive. So why not try out something else? And starting with some spot putty, before moving on to the sanding sticks, then some files, sanding paper, and the usual amount of patience that is. I gotta say, the top part was really easy to sand, and what little cracks were left with spot putty after the first pass was surprisingly little. I used my files to bring out the small details and the lines again. Then it was back to one more round of primer, putty and sanding. But let's just jump ahead. I want to show you a couple of issues I had with printing it in one go. The two holes in the top that revealed what was supposed to be the barrel. They were just impossible to sand down, at least to my liking. So I tried something else. I cut out a piece of plastic from an empty ice cream box, and then by using my heat gun, I could easily bend it to the shape I needed. And then by pushing it down hard, it perfectly covered the inside of the cylinder. And it actually looked perfect. And I believe if you hadn't seen me do it, I guess you never would have noticed. My second issue was the top aim. I just couldn't get it looking right again. And it suffered badly from being printed this way. So ultimately, I had to cut it off. And then I printed a new one. It didn't take long, and it sure looked a lot better. Well, that took a minute, but I believe it was worth it, and it came out looking okay in the end. And now everything was ready to be painted. The first step, of course, would be to get a smooth black glossy base coat. And I was glad to finally try out the base coat from Allclad. And it was glossy alright, but I felt it looked a little grainy, and even after a full day of curing. But oddly enough, the surface felt totally smooth to the touch. And after having masked everything off, it was time for some metallic paints. I know I didn't want a chromey look, but rather more of a gunmetal, and maybe with some highlights. So I went with a mixture of steel and duraluminum, if that's pronounced right. When peeling off the masking tape again, I was happy to see it was close enough to what I wanted. So next up, I wanted to try another thing I've been thinking about. So instead of spending a lot of time on masking off all the small details, using all the small delicate paintbrushes, I went ahead and used the Militech liquid chrome pens. I know this was going to turn out to be too chromy to blend with the rest of the prop, but I was hoping that when I applied the clear varnish, it would probably dull it down a little. At least enough to have a slightly different metallic look. Because I'm kind of always looking for new ways to make my props appear non-uniformed. It just gives it more life, if you know what I mean. I needed to apply the logo and the different numbers and letters. So being fortunate enough to have access to a vinyl cutter, I drew up the logo in Photoshop and then quickly cut it out in vinyl. In a rather flattering color, that is. I wonder why I have so much left over of it. And as you probably know, by laying down a piece of masking tape first, you get a good sense of how to place the stencils on top of the prop. You know, without it turning up crooked or misplaced of some sort. For the top barrel thingy, I chose a brass color, which I mixed with a hint of chrome, just to lighten it up a bit, and not to have it being so intense. And as for the rest, I went with a plain satin black acrylic paint. And I should probably mention, I've put down a couple of layers of glossy varnish beforehand, which has fully cured for a couple of days at this point, just so the masking doesn't pull away any of the previous paint. By the way, that's just another thing you ultimately learn the hard way. The metallic pens came in handy once again, because I needed to clean it up a bit in a couple of places. There were two tiny details near the front of the prop. They needed to be a darker sort of metal, so by masking off the area, I could achieve this by using some graphite powder and a cotton pad. I simply rubbed it gently on the glossy dark surface, and that was it. I was later going to tint it a bit in a bluish tone. Then I believe it's time for some light weathering. I use oil colors for this purpose. And I couldn't really think of any other techniques, or even some new or different approaches that I wanted to try. So this step ended up being pretty straightforward. But as always, be mindful not to go too heavy. A good tip for this is taking a step back to look at it every now and then. That's always a good way of telling if you're on the right track. Finally, I get the chance to try out some of my candy ink. It's a pretty translucent paint, with a very fine consistency of pigments. And by adding this translucent medium, to make it even more see-through, if you know what I mean. Because I was curious to see if I could pull it off, just by using ordinary paintbrushes. That's right, I wanted to try and brush it on. Sadly though, after a while, I could tell it really didn't achieve the look I wanted. So, like I've done before, I went back to using my airbrush and was just hoping that I could save it that way. In the end though, it ended up looking decent, I think. The candy ink though, it was excellent to use with the airbrush. The prop itself was looking a little dark at the moment, so I knew I needed to bring some more life into all the black parts. So the plan was, all the way from the beginning actually, to break it up a bit by using different layers of glossy varnish, and in this case, it was an all dull ultra matte varnish actually, just to be sure it's a dull varnish I guess. And the results were even better than I hoped for. It was looking really cool. It almost looked a bit like rubber. And then there were just a few details left. I painted on some yellow. I even ended up using some of my pens, which is something I've never done on a prop before. But hey, still testing out some stuff on this video build. And then I added some scratches, some wear and tear if you will, but I used a light grey paint for this, and not the usual metallic you see all the time. And the absolute last thing I did, it was to add a really matte black paint to the front of the nozzle. Hopefully, to make it look a bit like soot. And that, my friends, that was the last thing I did on this prop. So this was a collection of new mediums, and paints I've been wanting to try out for a while now, so why not put it all into one prop build? I really hope you found something interesting in it, and maybe got an idea or two of what to do with your next project. Or not what to do, that also works. And with that being said, that was it for this video build. I really hope you liked it. Make sure to subscribe and hit that bell, and I will try and share my next video build with you. Thank you for watching.